Welcome to the Tulane Future of Energy. Please be seated. Session will begin momentarily. A reminder that Tulane University promotes and protects the free exchange of ideas. Freedom of expression includes the ability to engage or not to engage in exchange, examination, and discussion of ideas. It does not include the right to disrupt the freedom of others. Therefore, we prohibit the physical or virtual disruption, shouting down, blocking, or suppressing of a protest, a demonstration, program, or an invited speaker's right to speak. Please note that disruptions of this nature may result in a removal from the event.
Good morning, and welcome to Tulane University. It is my pleasure to introduce our first session of the day, Rethinking Energy Infrastructure Through Energy as a Service. If time allows, at the end of the session, the panel will take questions submitted by the audience. To submit a question, please scan the QR codes located on the screens.
Thanks.
Please be sure to silence your cell phones. Enjoy the conversation, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, Jeanette, Weiland, Chief Business Officer of the School of Science and Engineering.
Good morning, everyone. How is everyone today? Awake? Enough coffee? Okay. Again, my name is Jeanette Weiland. I'm the Chief Business Officer for the School of Science and Engineering here at Tulane University. And I have the pleasure of introducing you to Mr. Patrick Norton, the COO and Senior Vice President of Tulane, as well as Mr. Rob Guthrie, the CEO of ENFRA. And this is the Rethinking Energy Infrastructure as Energy as a Service panel. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some questions. We'll do some light introductions first, and then at the end, we did save about 10 minutes or so for Q&A and questions from you, from the audience. So Patrick, do you want to start by giving us just a little bit about your background and your role at Tulane?
Yeah, sure. I'm Patrick Norton. I'm the Senior Vice President, COO, and Treasurer of Tulane. I've been in the C-suite now between Tulane and other institutions for over 20 years. So I have significant leadership experience. And at Tulane, it's an interesting position. It's a really melding of operations and finance. So all of finance, including investments in Treasury, HR, IT, facilities and capital planning, which is germane to this conversation. Risk management, public safety, IT, most of the non-academic functions of the institution report up through me. I'm also the principal on a number of key projects, including this project, which we'll get into a little more detail. I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin in accounting. I'm a CPA. I have a master's degree from Columbia University. And I've been at Tulane since August of 2016, so a little less than 10 years.
So next time I'm just going to ask what you don't do. That might make it, yeah. And Rob?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rob Guthrie. I'm Chief Executive Officer at ENFRA. It's a pleasure to be here. In terms of my background, I've been with the company for almost exactly 7 years, a little more than 7 years. I joined ENFRA in the late summer of 2018. To give you a little bit of our history, our DNA goes back 106 years. So we started in 1919 as a plumbing contractor here in Louisiana, Baton Rouge. This was before air conditioning. So we think of our story in chapters. I won't bore you with all the details, but Chapter 1 is a long chapter from 1919 to 2014. Chapter 2 begins when we bring a lot of the different companies that formed over the course of Chapter 1 together under one banner, under one roof, expressly for the purpose of creating the only vertically integrated energy as a service provider in North America. That was the vision in 2014. Chapter 2 ended at the end of 2021 when we sold the majority of the equity to CVC Diff Capital Partners. That was the twilight of 2021, December. And we think of the chapter we're in now as Chapter 3. So I joined kind of in the middle of Chapter 2. And if there's an operative word in Chapter 2, it was prove. We were proving this energy as a service model, trying to figure out who our ideal customer was, who it wasn't, and otherwise perfecting the architecture of the transaction. And Tulane was one of our first, kind of at the end of Chapter 2, beginning of Chapter 3 customers. So now we're in scale mode. We're scaling energy as a service out beyond Louisiana. New Orleans has been a very good laboratory for us. Tulane, obviously, one of our most important customers. So that's a little bit about me, and became CEO in June of 2024, so last year.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So to get started, Patrick, why don't you start by telling us what motivated you to explore the energy as a service model to begin with?
So Tulane University, we don't have the resources of our peers. We just don't. So we're always looking for innovative solutions for traditional problems. And what are they? Well, the main one for me, when I look at our campuses, is capital deployment. How do we actually take care of the deferred maintenance on our campus, build new, et cetera, with limited capital? So we said, okay, so how do we now look around innovative solution around power generation? When you think of Tulane University, we're like a small city, right? Yes, we do instruction, academics, and research, but we also do dining, we do housing, we do public safety, we do power generation, we do recreation, right? So we are in some way, so what we look to do is find folks that can do some of these activities better than us. There's a saying out there, your back office is somebody's front office, right? Find somebody every day that wakes up thinking about that service. We're not in the power generation, I mean, that's not our core competency, right? And I'll talk about that later when we talk about our partnership with ENFRA. But we were looking for an innovative solution to power generation. And we were looking for a couple of key things from a partner. One was no upfront capital investment from us, right? And also, let's try to keep it off balance sheet. So a beautiful world. Deploy capital, keep it off balance sheet through lease accounting. Number two is create better operational efficiency and expertise, right? Once again, you know, we have great people working in facilities management, and we have great people working in power in the power generation world. But there's others that have thousands of people. They have a deep, deep bench. Of course, we're looking for lower predictable costs, right? How do we kind of manage our energy spend that makes sense for our budget? Sustainability was a big part of what we were trying to do as well. How do we reduce greenhouse gases? And actually, how do we do it through efficiency? And some solar, but efficiency, because those are the greenhouse gas reductions I love, right? Reduce carbon, but you also reduce costs, right? So those are two types of green, right, that you really want to focus on. The other one, and it's a big, big thing we were looking for, is resilience and reliability. And that speaks to where we're located, and it speaks to backup power. Scalability and flexibility is another big element. We are growing as a campus. We built 11 buildings over the past less than 10 years. 11 buildings on our uptown campus, and we are growing and expanding, as you know, on our downtown campus. So how do we now partner with somebody that allows us to scale and be flexible? So let me talk about the transaction itself a little bit. So we had selected ENFRA to be our partner, and negotiations were going, they were moving, but they were a little slow, right? This is back in 2021. We had COVID. It just was a complicated transaction, maybe less of a sense of urgency, certainly on our part. I think Rob was really pushing to get this deal done. But then something happened on August 29th of 2021, right, folks? That was Hurricane Ida. So I remember being in a bunker at Building 85, which is not far from here, and dealing with, it was you deal with the storm and you deal with the aftermath, but you always got to think about the future, right? So I brought my key lieutenants in and said, listen, there are two things that we got to get done. One is we got to get the ENFRA deal done, because we have to create a more resilient campus. We lost power, we had to evacuate people, we lost research. It was a terrible situation for Tulane University that really, there were a lot of claims, a lot of insurance claims, a lot of losses because of that. And so I said, we cannot have this. We're in South Louisiana. We have to have resiliency, and we have to have backup power. That was number one. Number two was, and I'll digress a little bit, and it's the data center. So with power, you need to power up a data center. And our data center was in jeopardy. It was sitting down in downtown New Orleans at 1555 Port Riss on one of the top floors. I see some of the IT folks here, and they know what they went through. They literally had people watching generators. If the generators would have went out, somebody had to run up 15 flights because the elevators were out, because power was out in the city, remember? And had to turn off the data center, right? Turn off the servers, turn off the hardware before it fried. So that was the other part is let's get a deal done with ENFRA and let's get resiliency into our campus, backup power especially, and all the other pieces that we'll talk about. And then second was the data center, move that to Virginia and really protect our assets at the university. We got that ENFRA deal done 4 months after Ida. By 12/31, we had the deal done. And that, the catalyzing event was Ida, right?
I seem to remember trading emails with you on December 31st.
Yeah, I was actually at the happiest place on the planet at Disney.
That's right.
With my family, when somebody sent me a note saying we got a problem with the transaction, I was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm at Disney and you tell me you have a problem, right? So we overcame that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it was there was that sense of urgency, but we also had a good partner too, and we'll talk about that too. Aligning of incentives and aligning of shared values is really important.
So, Patrick, let me let you pause for a moment, because your perspective is obviously unique to Tulane in this geography. But Rob, as ENFRA continues to expand across the entire country, can you talk to the audience a little bit about what kinds of institutions or infrastructure specifically are ideal for an energy as a service model? And then if you want to elaborate on why Tulane was such a great fit and a laboratory for you, it'd be great.
I'll try to answer this as briefly as I can. But I think the first thing is, what do we mean when we say energy as a service? And it's a fairly broad tent, but in my mind, any energy as a service transaction has three hallmark kind of characteristics. One is that you are the customer, i.e. the company or the institution, like a Tulane, is transferring material risk off of its plate and onto the plate of the provider. That's energy-related risk, obviously, in an EAS transaction, but it could be related to energy performance. It could also be related to the performance of underlying energy assets, or it could be both. That's a bedrock requirement. Two, the capital required to improve that infrastructure is brought to the transaction not by the customer, but by the vendor, or in some cases by a third party. This is getting to Patrick's point about no upfront capital. And three, the provider, i.e. the vendor, is going to recover that capital investment through a monthly subscription payment that the customer makes to the vendor/supplier. And for it to be EAS, normally that payment is going to be characterized as an operating expense and not as a capital expense. So from the perspective of somebody like Patrick, you have the benefit of shifting what would otherwise be CapEx into OpEx, which has some accounting advantages. You also have the benefit of transferring risk that a lot of our customers view as non-core off your plate into the plate of someone who gets out of bed every day thinking about it. That's an EAS deal. Now, a lot of flavors and varieties. There are companies that do EAS and that meet all three of those tests, but are very focused on fast food chains. There's one particular company that has a certain kind of rinse and repeat toolkit that they do with Wendy's and McDonald's franchises, and they do 60, 80, 100 stores at a time. Those are shorter term arrangements. They're typically capitalized with a lot of equity, so it's a higher cost of capital. You have other providers that are more focused in the C&I space. That's not us. So for us to answer that question, we are looking for an institutional tax-exempt customer. Tulane's a perfect example of that. And not only that, but we're looking for a customer that's a large load user, has a lot of square footage, has a high energy intensity. We're looking for a customer that's creditworthy, has an investment grade credit rating. It's easier for us to attract capital to the transaction if that's the case. We're looking for a customer who has a business as usual or a status quo that is at least challenging, in some cases is unsustainable. So even with customers that have a AA credit rating, there's almost always something that's compelling them toward the transaction. It could be a backlog of deferred maintenance. It could be a need to transfer risk. It could be constraints on the balance sheet. There's something about the status quo that the leadership feels is challenging or in some cases not sustainable. So when you kind of look at those characteristics, it's not an accident by any means that we've focused our EAS model on two verticals, healthcare and higher education. And those are really the only two markets where we focus. So Tulane, I would say this, just to wrap and answer your question finally, sorry. You know, Tulane's a great partner on paper because it's an A+ credit rating, it's a great, strong institution, has all those characteristics that we're looking for. Tulane is an excellent partner when you consider the qualitative factors, the intangibles, such as geography. It happens to be in our backyard. That, you know, we're headquartered here in New Orleans. That gives us the ability to deepen the partnership in ways that would be more challenging if it were in a different zip code. So there are things we're doing. We have what's called a 360 promise, where we've promised to bring in 360 Tulane graduates over the course of this partnership, which sunsets in 2052. I think we just hired our 31st Tulane graduate recently, so we're well on our way. We also have a program called Elevate, which we're launching next week, where we send 20 of our emerging leaders to Tulane for a year-long program through the Freeman School to sharpen their skills and better prepare them for the challenges of leadership. So could we do that if you airlifted Tulane and put it in New Hampshire? Probably, but it would be more difficult. So there's that factor, and then finally, the university is just run by fabulous people. And
Clearly.
yeah, I mean, that helps a lot. We really enjoy working with everybody here at the university, across the board.
So just to add something to what Rob said, and the credit quality institution, I think, really matters. Because I'm sure you get folks coming through the door all the time, and you're like, yeah, we'd love to help you, but
Yeah,
we don't see a long-term future, right? Higher ed is going through and has tremendous headwinds right now, right? So the fact that we're not only pretty strong credit quality, but pretty innovative institution that's expanding and growing should be music to anybody's ears that wants to do a deal like this with us. So I think that's important. And by the way, it didn't hurt that at the end of 2021, interest rates were in a very different place than they are today.
yes.
What I mean by that is lower, right? And that always makes deals like this pencil out a lot easier, right, for both parties. So I think that really helped.
Absolutely.
So Patrick, when you were introducing yourself, you named your entire portfolio, which is a lot. So you have a lot going on, I'll just say that. And then when it comes to describing your impetus for even exploring this deal, it all sounds great and positive. What were your hesitations? Like what was the risk factor? Were there stakeholders outside of Tulane that you had to sell this idea to? Because this was avant-garde in terms of Tulane's history, right?
And it's probably why it took a little longer. We did that catalyzing event called IDA to really push us. It was a fairly new model for us, right? Actually, a fairly new model for higher ed. It was done in a hospital space, we knew that, but it was unique and complex. And by the way, long-term deals, if you get the underwriting wrong, you can be upside down fast. And there have been examples throughout Tulane's history of being upside down on transactions because we didn't do the underwriting right. So that was one hesitation. The other one is just loss of control, right? We're giving up our assets. We're relying on now a third party to provide power in a world in which that's a risk to our campus because of where we're located. I'm not saying if you're in New Hampshire that you don't need power. I'm just saying here with hurricane risk, storm risk, et cetera, and by the way, just risk to the energy grid and just the infrastructure. That was, that gives an area of hesitation as well. The other one, very complex agreements, right? Very, very complex legal agreements. Lots of lawyers on this deal. And then lastly, and I don't want to soft sell this anyway, is it was hard to go through a competitive process because we know what the scope was. Usually if you do a capital project, you know your scope, you get multiple bids, you go out there, you base your selection on both a combination of quality and price, and you select, sometimes you have a bake-off. It wasn't that way because we really know the scope of this. It was so unique. So we had to go in there, and it was like a little bit of trust, but we actually put ENFRA on notice that if we believe we don't have the deal that we believe we should have, then we're going to go out and actually interview more. So how do we kind of address some of these items, as I mentioned? So we aligned incentives. It's good to have a counterparty that you feel good about, that you have some give and take, that came to the table with solutions. I think that was really important. Build in protections in your agreements. Make sure you have really good, solid protections that if things go south, that's why we have lots of lawyers, that there are exit clauses, et cetera. Because this, and the thing is, if you've ever done work with me, if you ever tried to do a transaction with me, my mantra is, I'm looking for a fair deal, right? And Tulane knows what fair deals look like. So don't come to me with a deal that is not fair, because we know what one looks like. But we're also not looking to do an unfair deal. We want everybody to be successful here, because it's a 30-year partnership at a minimum. We want them to be in business because they're providing power to us. So there'll be nothing gained by us, punishing them with some negotiation where they can't make a profit. So everybody has to win here. So we always talk about that. We just want a fair deal. You need to have a really good advisor. That is absolutely key to this whole transaction, was having a great advisor, not a good advisor, a great advisor. And we used E&Y Infrastructure Advisors. They were excellent. If folks want to know who I worked with, come to me after the session. I'll tell you who the person was. But that was so key to getting this deal done, is having a good advisor. And they were there from ideation to page turns on the legal documents, okay? And then after, doing the post-mortem, doing the monitoring afterwards. I can't speak enough about how well they are. And then lastly, bring your board and your CEO, in our case, the president, along. Don't kind of drop this on them at the last second and go, hey, guess what? We want to do this transaction. Make sure you certainly advise them over time, and then we had group meetings, we did FAQs, we did a number, people very comfortable with what we were doing. And so at the end of the day, it's an easy yes. So those were the hesitations, but at the end of the day, I think we mitigated those pretty well.
That's great. Switching gears a little bit, Rob, let's get into like the actual technical aspects of these types of agreements or contracts. So using Tulane as the example, and then you can talk about your other projects across the country, because I'm sure there's a lot of variability. Is there something about an EAS contract that makes it a better fit for institutions like Tulane, where you're sitting in a very historic city with dated infrastructure? You know where I'm going. We already talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it goes back to, so when we do one of these transactions, there's 4 things we're doing. And a lot of it rhymes with and intertwines with those 3 hallmarks that I mentioned a moment ago. But first thing we're doing is monetizing the customer's infrastructure. So we're going to make an upfront payment to the university or the healthcare system, whoever the counterparty is, in exchange for certain contractual rights related to underlying energy infrastructure. At a minimum, that would be infrastructure that produces and distributes chilled water and steam. It could also include assets that produce and distribute electricity. So that is absolutely step 1. There's a corpus of money that changes hands, and that's the exchange of values. Number 2, the customer has the ability to use some or all of that capital that they receive through step 1 to reinvest back into their infrastructure, to renew it, to optimize energy performance, in this case of Tulane, to bolster resilience and sort of harden that infrastructure. And almost without exception, the savings that derive as a result of those design build improvements are contractually guaranteed by ENFRA over the life of the partnership typically. So the customer has the peace of mind that I'm going to do these improvements, I'm going to make these improvements, and they are going to yield a certain amount of reduction in consumption and demand as it relates to my utilities. 3 is the risk transfer that we already talked about. So that's where the as-a-service moniker really applies. We are operating and maintaining the infrastructure that we monetize in step 1. The customer's making that monthly payment, and we have very stiff damages if we don't perform, that it could in the worst case, could add up to a termination for cause, which would be catastrophic for us. And then 4th, we're doing all of the above in a way that is favorable from an accounting perspective and that does not compromise the customer's balance sheet, preserves their balance sheet for future core mission pursuits. So, to answer your question, yes, if you're in a hurricane-prone area, if you're in the Gulf Coast, there's probably a little bit more of a pronounced need to embrace something like EAS, but generally speaking, regardless of geography, almost all of our customers, without fail, have a very finite amount of capacity on the balance sheet. They have a finite amount of discretionary cash, and they want to preserve that cash, if they're intelligent, like Patrick is, for revenue-generating pursuits that align more closely with core mission. And so things like resilience, things like optimizing a chilled water plant, things like solar, things like battery storage, while they may have attractive economics, there's just not any room to pursue those improvements because there's so many other competing needs that are core mission. So the answer to the question is yes. I think when you couple in the fact that if you're in New Orleans or you're in another area that is maybe a little bit more vulnerable to changes in weather, then that need becomes all the more pronounced. But it's true regardless of geography. It's what we've seen, which is one of the reasons why we've had such success scaling it.
That's great.
And just to piggyback on what Rob said about the risk transfer, that was really important to us. Then I'll get off our balance sheet, but really get it off our operating model, right? So we had dozens of folks working in the power generation area, right? And by the way, it was a seamless transition. Like we offered them, or ENFRA offered them jobs and everything. It was very seamless. And the partnership with HR is really important, by the way, on these type of deals. When you make the transition, make sure you have a lot, and we'll talk about that probably, it's probably one of the future questions, on all the different team members that need to be part of this. It's not just, finance folks. It's really a lot of different other folks. But the risk transfer is really important because we had 30 folks. We had roughly 30 folks. And ENFRA has thousands, right? We didn't have even, at one point, we didn't even have a high voltage electrician on staff. So you're in a situation where, you look at ENFRA and they have access to tons of that, right? So it just, for an institution like Tulane, in the area that we are located, in some way that seemed to be the really important part of this. Sure, finance is important, deployment of capital is important, but ensuring that we had the right people maintaining our plants, power generation, on a campus where we have young people and research happening was actually super important to us.
Well, on that note, Rob, I know you're really proud of some of the assets you have on this campus, the backup generators, the plant. Do you want to talk to the audience about that? And because you did mention that this was kind of a laboratory for projects as you expand.
Yeah, I think Patrick said it really well. There's kind of 2 parts to the development of this partnership. Part 1 is everything that occurred prior to August 29, and part 2 is everything after. I don't really remember, Patrick, if resilience was part of the cookbook prior to August 29. It may have been talked about, but it certainly took on a new urgency starting in September. I think so that is, if you were to ask me from a technical perspective, what's the centerpiece of the transaction, it's that. Like, hardening the infrastructure, giving Tulane the peace of mind that if there's another hurricane that comes through, they can get off the grid, and having that reliability, that is absolutely the thesis of the project. There are other things that were done here that are not maybe not all that sexy and don't show well in a brochure, but that economically were really compelling. A good example, something as simple as LED lighting. You know, it's not a terribly complicated scope of work. You change a fluorescent lamp to LED or an incandescent lamp to LED, or you change the fixture out. It's really more maintenance work than anything else. But when you are doing it at the scale of something like Tulane, when you include uptown and downtown, there's something like 50 to 60,000 light fixtures that were converted to LED probably within an 8 or 9 month period once the transaction launched. And that's well over $1 million a year of cost savings to the university just through avoided consumption and demand. So I think we said at the time, and I think we were right, we didn't have the data to back it up, but it's like we probably have the largest single LED retrofit project in the history of Louisiana, if not the region. It was a massive project. So there are other things that, you know, were kind of the economic or financial bedrock. Our building automation system improvements had very attractive economics. And those things, when you put them in the soup and you mix them with things like resilience, that from a financial perspective don't have a huge ROI, but they have intangible benefits and reliability benefits that are huge, then you create this transaction that, when it's all mixed together, is still accretive to the university's net worth. It still uplifts the bottom line. It still provides positive year-over-year cash flow relative to the business as usual. And that's the magic of it, is that if we can create enough momentum and headroom and uplift through the low-hanging fruit, we can add in things like resilience that don't have maybe quite as high an internal rate of return, but they have a lot of value in other ways, and that is really the goal with every partner.
So I'll add, there was a massive deployment of capital. And the plan at the time, I don't know if the number is still penciled out, was 5 million square feet of lighting retrofit.
Yeah.
That's a lot of square footage, 5 million square feet. So to your point, a very large project. 9 backup generators. So the point about resiliency, prior to the ENFRA transaction and deployment of the generators, we had backup power. It's kind of spotty. Dealt with life safety, dealt with some research buildings. But we wanted to ensure that every residential building, so all our residences, housing on campus, the commons, and all of our research facilities, uptown and downtown, and on the North Shore, had sufficient and contemporary backup power, right? Ida was a terrible event in so many ways, but it really impacted our research in just a big way, right? Researchers lost research, it was terrible. And we weren't gonna let that happen again. So we deployed a massive amount of backup power, and we're a tremendously resilient campus now because of the backup power. Now, when Francine, right, that was the last year, backup power came up. Students were in the res halls, having a good time in the rain, right? The Commons was up, research facilities are up. Why? Because of the proactive steps we took as part of this transaction, right? It's nice when that actually comes together, right? What we actually were, we planned to do and we implemented, and actually we executed at the end of the day.
Well, on that note, Rob and I were talking earlier before we came on stage about corporate culture and the people. And so, Patrick, to your point about that backup power coming up, Rob, do you want to talk a little bit about how you lead your organization? Because those are extraordinarily tough circumstances in real time.
We have a photo. I don't know if you've seen it. If Danny's here, Danny Galloway, she's certainly seen it. I think she might have taken it, but we use it a lot internally. It's from Francine, and we had to go out and engage the generators in the pouring rain. We had 2 gentlemen on our team who did that, and there's a great photo of them. They're soaking wet head to toe and grinning ear to ear, and we use that picture a lot to say this is the kind of culture we want. Like, do the job, help the customer out, even if it takes getting soaking wet. And that really, you know, we think about what our objectives are in a partnership like this, it's the reward for us is we keep the customer for life. That's the simple goal. So you have to have this mindset, starting with the operational team, of there cannot be any short-term focus. The focus has to be long-term, which means you do what you say you're going to do, which means you know, if for some reason you owe the customer money, if there's a deficit or a missed KPI, you do it very promptly. You don't quibble over dollars and cents. And third, I would say you do the things necessary to help the customer in ways that occasionally are outside of your scope. So just be helpful. If the customer has a problem, jump on it, fix it. We feel like if we can foster that kind of culture, then we're in a much better position to keep the customer for life. We want the customer to get to a place as quickly as possible where they can't imagine operating without us. We want to be woven into their team and their system. And I think, you know, we've been mostly successful with that here at Tulane. We obviously have to continue to do that, but very, very happy with how it's gone so far.
So just to add, listen, everything's beautiful when the sun is shining, right? Sun is shining, everybody's happy, power's up. It's when it starts raining and when the power goes down is when you get to know who your partner is, right? It's that simple. And by the way, that was one of the hesitancies, because loss of control is like, okay, there's going to be a point in time when power does go down. Are they going to be able to deliver? Sure, you put your protections in your legal documents, but big deal, right? I mean, it's like, that's great. We have some remedies, but we're still out of power, right? So that was, but we saw the work that was done and actually the service provided when the power did go out, and we're pretty happy.
So on that note of performance, and you mentioned KPIs and such, how does ENFRA ensure performance, accountability, and transparency over the life cycle of this 30-year contract in this case?
It's a mix of human and technology. So the technology piece is critical. We have a tool called ENFRA Connect that is proprietary. It's a software program that sits on top of the building automation system for the customer and monitors kind of the key performance of the plant. That tool to this point is largely a fault detection program. So it has algorithms that find faults in systems and report them out, which allows us to continuously commission the systems that we're operating and maintaining and stay within the buoys on energy performance. Because the way, as I mentioned, you know, just about every EAS partnership we have has a guarantee of savings. That's Tulane's no exception. So we're always measuring, verifying, monitoring performance related to our energy guarantee, so that if we see a negative trend, we can respond as swiftly as possible and get the ship right side up. It's also a function of regular communication with the customer. It's one thing to have the technology, it's another thing to make the customer aware as quickly as possible, particularly if there's bad news. Hiding bad news never results in a good outcome. So we try to train that, but it's a combination of the two. And to Patrick's point, you know, you want one of the challenges of scaling this is that you can't just copy and paste what you did in one transaction and apply it to another. Patrick mentioned the lawyers that were in the room. There were, I would say, probably too many lawyers. But you end up with a very bespoke deal that reflects the objectives of each customer. And in terms of risk, you know, we're very comfortable taking risk that falls within our circle of competence. We have a risk here. We have material risk to shareholders if something goes wrong, but we view that risk largely as controllable, and we're comfortable with what's negotiated. And, you know, operating, maintaining, designing, building energy infrastructure, as our name suggests, is core. So it took a little while to get to the right place in this transaction, but we ultimately got to a place that, to use Patrick's word, we felt was very fair and served us well thus far.
Wonderful. As we know, Petra, Tulane had a $5.2 billion economic impact on the state of Louisiana just over 1 year, right? So on that note, how has this partnership, as an example, opened up new educational or workforce opportunities for not only Tulane students, but local community members And Rob, you might want to jump in terms of how you hire and how everything's integrated.
Well, I think it was actually part of the transaction, right? We papered in this transaction that we wanted to ensure that there were educational and internship opportunities for students in Tulane. And by the way, that was easy for ENFRA to say yes to because they need a pipeline of new employees, right? It's a beautiful thing, right? Now, we have great, smart, diligent students that want to be in the energy space, and then there is an absolute need on the ENFRA side as they're growing and expanding to fill that. So I think there's a beautiful relationship between Freeman and ENFRA on this. As far as the community is concerned, I think as ENFRA expands, I think there are great opportunities in the city of New Orleans and beyond. And I think about what's happening in the state around power generation. As data centers are being built and the need for new power, there's going to be a role for ENFRA to play. I assume that.
Yep.
Speaking for Rob's company now, I don't know why I'm doing that. But there's power. Certainly, there's power needs in the state, and then with that comes absolute opportunities for skilled and trained technicians to be working there. So that's my comment there.
That's a trend, not to derail us, but we talked a lot in this conversation about backup power. We see, I think we're already getting to a future where large load users like Tulane become mini power plants themselves through distributed generation. The grid is more congested than it's ever been. That is to some extent a result of abnormal weather. It's also, to a large extent, to Patrick's point, a function of just this huge imbalance of supply and demand that's caused by the AI boom and the data center build out, and Louisiana is part of that too, with the big data center that's being built north of here. So there's an opportunity now more than ever for large load users like Tulane. The peak demand on the uptown campus is close to 13 megawatts. There's a lot of juice, a lot of load here, to not only have the infrastructure to back themselves up if there's ever, God forbid, an interruption to the grid, but also when there's not, to be able to dispatch power when the grid signals are right and do it in a way that's economic. Mm-hmm. So we are seeing more and more of that in and beyond Louisiana, where, if it's a university campus or if it's a acute care hospital, the ability to back that site up to give them, A, the reliability and the resiliency that gives them that peace of mind, but B, to be able to dispatch that load when the grid is becoming congested, and we can do that in a way that's economic, provides a good return. We're going to see more and more of that. And if it's not dispatch, it's curtailment. So there's kind of two ways you can do that. You can dispatch power or you can curtail load. And as long as you can do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize student experience or patient comfort, depending on where you're working, that's a good way of doing it too. So a lot of our focus in the future is on improving our technology to be able to do that in a way that's automated and expedient. So,
and Rob, I think your point about, in some ways, we're a power plant that can distribute power. Part of the transaction is that we can do that, right? That we can actually have off-takers. It takes from the excess power in our community, and there's a revenue share on that. So we thought of everything during this transaction. So think about those parts, think about guaranteed savings. I mean, there are a lot of things you need to explore. By the way, it's why you need a good advisor as you go about a transaction like this.
So before I move on to some kind of wrap-up questions, we have a few minutes left. I did point in the audience at your ENFRA recruiter, Ms. Julia, who's fabulous, and she does not only recruit for the Freeman School of Business. This is my commercial for the School of Science and Engineering talent that we are cranking out every year. So,
but of course,
yes.
I'd be bad at my job if I didn't mention that. Okay, so Rob, let's just to kind of take this back to a macro level. As you scale, you are everywhere from California to North Carolina, across the entire country. What barriers do you see to scaling EAAS as a model?
It's a great question. We think of it kind of as a flywheel, and eventually you get to critical mass and the wheel starts to spin on its own energy. And I would say we've probably had a little bit more success, not success, but the flywheel has spun a little bit faster in healthcare and not-for-profit healthcare than it has for us in higher education. We have some wonderful university partners, Tulane being the first and foremost, Abilene Christian University, Hampton University in Virginia, University of New Orleans right here in the city. So we are very optimistic about this, exporting this model really in the private higher education space. The scale barriers are, to get to critical mass, which we've been able to do more readily in healthcare, as I mentioned. And we were talking a little bit about this before we came on. And I don't mean to flatter for the sake of flattery, but you do need a Patrick. And that is a key ingredient. You need a financial decision maker, and everybody is averse to risk, and I think Patrick is as well. He'd probably tell you, I don't want to speak for you, but you also need someone who's forward thinking and can see the opportunity and is willing to burn the calories to understand it and get their arms around it and pursue it. So I think for us in the higher education space, there's maybe a little bit more of an absence of that kind of thinking. It's a little more challenging. There's a little more resistance. There's a little more adherence for adherence's sake to tradition. There's more layered decision making. And that's been tough for us. But we have found the right ingredients with campuses outside of Tulane, and we continue to have success in that market. So we think we'll get to a place very soon with higher ed where it starts to really follow what's happening in healthcare. But the healthcare side of our business is the one that is really on fire, and that's taken us to California, and from California to Maine to New Jersey to Indiana.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So healthcare, higher ed, any other industries you guys
No.
are, no? Okay,
No.
those are pretty big
Yeah,
on their
there's
own.
enough there to keep us busy for a long time.
That's wonderful. And then Patrick, if you could give one piece of advice to organizations considering an EAS contract, what would that be?
Do your due diligence, get a great advisor, and underwrite this really well. You can really go upside down if you don't do the underwriting correctly on your end. It's a complex transaction, and once again, and protect yourself with your legal agreements. And of course, I'm giving you more than one, right? One is, and make sure your counterparty, you have aligned incentives, and make sure there's a fair deal here. But it goes back to, it's a really unique transaction. Most institutions don't have the core competency within their institution to actually look at it and really understand it. Get a good advisor. It's money well spent.
Well, thank you both. Are there any questions from the audience?
Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions.
Oh, we don't have time. Oh, sorry about that. Well, if you have questions, these gentlemen might be hanging around afterwards.
I thought we managed it.
Yeah, I thought we did it
beautifully. We have a
perfectly.
little shot clock here, and we just ran.
Okay, I'll take the blame.
It's a shame.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here, especially first thing in the morning.
Thank you for joining us for this session. Our next session in this space will be the Innovation Arc, from state strategy to startup scale-up, which is scheduled to start at 9:25.